buddy. Well, it's at this point that I realize I am not quite clever enough to tell whether or not it is my headset mic or my webcam mic. And in either case, not quite clever enough to figure out how to make it one or the other actively. Either way. So, we're continuing with The Ship Who Sang, part 2 of chapter 3. It looks like chapter 4 is a lot longer, so that's probably going to be another multi-parter as well. Anyway, touchdown was not auspicious. To begin with, the spaceport was overshadowed by the jagged, glowing peaks of Alioth's active continental spine. They were told to touch down some distance from the small rectangular building that housed what spaceport control and administration the inhospitable planet required. Kira protested they were too far from the building to effect a quick transfer, and was brusquely informed that she was to await the arrival of a ground vehicle. It took its time in arriving. A huge transport truck loaded with cowled figures who took positions around Helva's base, elbow to elbow. Their belligerent attitude and presence seemed an insult to a ship bearing Helva's markings. "What is the meaning of mounting a guard on a scout ship in Central World's medical service?" Kira demanded in firm tones to the control tower. "For the protection of your cargo." At this moment, the charge officer of the guard contingent requested permission to enter the scout ship. "Well?" Helva asked softly of Kira. "I don't see how we have much choice, but I suggest you tape this and tight beam it back to Regulus." "My thought too," Helva agreed. "And I think I'll play silent." "Good idea," Kira said, adjusting a contact button on her cloak. There were many backward planets where the partnership of the mobile Brawn Scout and his brain ship were improperly understood. On such worlds, it often had been to the advantage of the partners to keep the brain's abilities unknown until needed, if needed. The button would allow Helva to keep in sight and sound contact with Kira. The officer, an ominous, tall figure in his black cowl, appeared at the airlock, which Helva opened. The man, his face unseen, towered above Kira. A thin hand was extruded from the draperies and made a gesture toward the breast and hidden face that could be interpreted as a salute of sorts. Kira responded in kind, waiting for him to speak first. "Second watch, Officer Noneth," he finally intoned. "Medical Scout Kira of Canopus," Kira replied with dignity. Helva did not fail to note that the girl clung to her planetary designation, rather than as a ship partner identity KH-834. "Your presence is required at High Temple to discuss the donation," Noneth said in hollow, measured tones. "Time is of the essence in a transfer of this nature," Kira began smoothly. "Time," intoned the officer, "is at the disposal of him who orders. It is at his command you are to come." "The seed is ready for shipment?" Kira asked, insistent on some information. A shudder rippled the fabric surrounding the figure of Noneth. "Do not blaspheme." "Unintentional, I assure you," Kira said, calmly refusing to offer further apology. "Come," ordered the officer in a voice of command that crackled with authority. "He who orders bids you come, woman," a sepulchral, harsh voice echoed shrilly through the tiny cabin. Kira won another mark of respect from Helva when she gave no indication of surprise at that awesome bellow. The scout's eyes flickered briefly over the smooth oval fastening on Noneth's hood. Helva, as well as Kira, recognized the device for what it was: a two-way control similar to the one Kira wore, a type issued only to service personnel. There had been nova of a scandal when Central Worlds discovered who was distributing these restricted designs on backwater planets. "The order must be obeyed. The temple itself has spoken," Noneth cried in a voice quavering with reverence. "Dally not." The temple was feminine, Helva realized, having appraised the timbre of the voice. "I am under orders," Kira said evasively. "That is the eternal truth," Noneth replied, nodding in solemn accord as Kira apparently responded in a manner consonant with his religion. He raised his hand in a stylized gesture and added, May death come to you at the moment of your triumph. Kira, about to make a graceful obeisance, halted and stared up at the hidden face, her eyes wide with shock. May death come to you at the moment of your triumph, she murmured. The blood drained from her face. Is not death the greatest of blessings? Asked the priest, mildly surprised at her ignorance. It was all Helva could do to remain silent, but a deep instinct stifled her half-formed groan of protest. It took a little extra interpolation to surmise that death on Alioth would be the greatest of blessings, a relief from the terrible drudgery, the grim and gloomy aspect of the planet, with its hovering, smoking mountains. The normal perils of molten mining, plus the daily anxiety of a volcano emerging and erupting underfoot, had emphasized the brevity of existence until the emphasis had swung towards death as a welcome respite from grinding toil and miserable conditions. Was CENTCOM out of its alleged mind when it did not ban Kira from landing on Alioth, knowing her compulsion? She wouldn't even have to strain against her conditioning. Yes. Yes, death is the greatest of blessings. That is eternal truth, Kira repeated, trance-like. Come with me, Nanath enjoined, gently persuasive, his gaunt hand beckoning to Kira. Come, echoed the sepulchral voice, greedily. The ground car had no sooner left the base of KH-834 than the guards began to move. She will see him who orders, one sighed enviously. The bare-faced harlot will be given an unjust reward. Now, up the lift and let us secure the cargo. Think of it, thousands more to die to expiate the sin against him who orders. That was sufficient for Helva. She locked the lift controls and slid the airlock securely tight. Curse, hammer, buffet, though those Aliothites might. Helva was invulnerable against such weapons as Alioth's technology possessed. She activated the tight beam to CENTCOM. Alioth would rue the day its religious hierarchy decided to hijack the cargo of a service ship, much less kidnap its brawn. Dispassionately, Helva took account of the matter of Kira's departure. The girl had, in the extremities of grief, sought death, but Helva doubted Kira would betray her service. For one thing, she couldn't, although Aliothites didn't realize that the ship was capable of independent thought and action. Having enticed the Baron away, they assumed the ship was grounded, impotent, and they could take their time forcing Kira to accede to their designs for the embryos. I could just leave, Helva thought. If death is the reward these zealots seek, then I don't need to have any compunctions about burning the guard detail to its due merits. But I cannot leave Kira. Not yet. I have time. What was the matter with CENTCOM? They were never around when you needed them. And why in the name of little apples did they permit Kira to land on a death-dedicated planet? You idiot, Helva told herself, because they didn't know that's the way the religion turned. The ground rumbled beneath her. Far to the north, a fireball zoomed heavenward, bursting in a shower of lighted fragments. The other fireworks followed, as well as more ominous movement beneath Helva's tail fins. She held herself ready for an instant liftoff if her balance was shaken beyond the normal recovery in her stabilizers. Somewhere to the northeast, another volcano answered the eruption of the first.
Opal has decided to participate in bedtime story by getting scritches, because she is a good girl. Love you, puppy.
Helva saw the ground car carrying Kira reach the central building, and she muttered ineffective mental commands for Kira to snap out of her trance and switch on the contact button. The guard, impervious to the mass eruptions, went right on trying to force the lift mechanism. Their cowls kept falling from their faces, and they kept replacing them as if a bare face were indecent. The red light from the fireballs
Opal demands attention and love.
The red light from the fireballs that continued to light the sky illuminated gaunt, ascetic faces, dirty with ingrained volcanic dusts, dull-eyed from improper nutrition and continual fatigue. Kira alighted from the transport and, flanked by guards, was escorted to a smaller vehicle that disappeared from Helva's augmented vision into the complex of city buildings. The transport turned back to the field and Helva. An enterprising guard urged his fellows to bring a gantry rig against the ship. Slowly, and with much effort, they wheeled the cumbersome frame from a far side of the field. Helva watched the performance with grim amusement. Their own fault for insisting we set down so far from the facilities of the port. Perhaps they couldn't see in the gloom of Alioth's perpetual twilight that the lock was closed tight too. She tried to rouse CENTCOM on tight beam, cursing at the delay because she was so worried about not reaching Kira on the contact. Contact button, she muttered to herself, recalling the anomalous appearance of one on Nonath's hood. Now, if it were a service issue, or a true imitation, she thought, she ought to be able to use it. That temple female had utilized one to second Nonath's commands to Kira. Helva wasted no time in throwing open the wide wave on the contact band. As hastily, she closed it, dazed with the resultant chaotic kaleidoscope of sight and sound that besieged her. Mentally reeling from the impact on her senses, she wondered painfully how she had managed to get several 100,000 contacts at once. Quickly, she scanned the scurrying guards, still trying to wrestle the gantry frame to her. Each one had a button securing his hood at the neck. Oh, great glittering galaxies, moaned Helva. The religion must be composed of schizoids to deal with that kind of chaos. Holding tightly to her sanity, Helva opened the band a fraction, wincing at the confusion of sound and sight. She tried to focus in on one contact alone, but felt herself drowning in the myriad pictures that returned. It was like trying to focus on a pinpoint through the faceting of a fly's eyeball. Grimly, she refined vision to one small area, forcing herself to accept only one of the conflicting and overlapping images that returned at her. She cut out the sound completely. Fortunately, every wearer in the selected segment was converging on one location, crossing a huge plaza, crowded and gyrating, swaying, cowled figures, their robes flapping around them as they approached the wide, deep steps that led up the side of the dead volcano. This was the ziggurat that Helva had noticed on the tape clip. Suddenly, every figure tilted. It took Helva a moment to realize that she too was rocking with the earthquake as 3 more volcanoes spewed out their guts skyward. She waited alert lest the instability of the spaceport field become too critical for her to remain planet-bound. An ecstatic, moaning roar wafted through the air, now hazy as the Earth's minute shifts released gases from narrow fissures in the floor of the plaza. Helva, already confused, did not at first catch the significance of the gas, nor the fact that the ululation was reaching her ship's outer ears, not issuing from the dumb contact circuits. Helva increased power in the tight beam, desperately trying to raise CENTCOM over the volcanic interferences. Simultaneously, she cut in the narrow contact, anxious not to lose Kira. Everyone in the plaza was now waving arms aloft, hoods thrown back from joyful faces, raised to the spark-filled, gas-fogged skies. Then the Aliothites wheeled, ducking their heads to breathe deeply of the rising gas fumes. Incredulous, Helva watched as more and more people pushed and crowded around the fissures, inhaling deeply, staggering away, their faces rapt, arms aloft, movements erratic. Then Helva realized that the gases were either hallucinogenic or euphoric, doubly dangerous at a time of mass volcanic eruptions. Yet the exposed open plaza was rapidly filling with bodies, either already intoxicated or frantically trying to be. The significance of gas eruptions in the plaza before the temple of this demoniac religion was not lost on Helva. Obviously, this effect was known and calculated by the temple hierarchy. Helva was revolted and enraged by such depravity, and she redoubled her efforts to locate Kira and her escort. She would have to leave the vehicle and enter the plaza on the south side. One multi-exposed group caught her searching eyes. There couldn't be 2 such slender, hoodless figures on this mad planet. Kira was just entering the plaza, her inexorable progress toward the ziggurat steps impeded by the jerking, jolting freak inebriates.
Oh boy, if you move closer to me, I can pet you better. Yes, I do love you, dork.
Fully alarmed, Helva widened the band, trying to skip from contact to contact, forward towards Kira. The effect was maddening, like seeing thousands of film tapes all interlocking fuzzily, playing on the same master screen. For the first time in her life, Helva felt vertigo and nausea. Her sense of impending disaster deepened as she tried to reach Kira before she entered the Temple of Death. Placed as it was on top of the massive ziggurat, right next to the old volcano, it must be heavy with the hallucinogenic gases. Helva thanked the service for the small blessings that Kira had been desensitized to such hazards as hallucinogens, but the girl was as immobile in her trance as if she were susceptible. Helva groaned at her inability to reach Kira, spiritually and physically. Oh, an answering groan rose from the multitude. The temple weeps! The garbled cry went up from 1,000 throats. Even the guards at the spaceport, wrestling with the gantry frame, echoed the chant. Oh, Helva gasped. Her surmise that she was broadcasting to all of the Eliathites was confirmed. This new exclamation was repeated by the crowd. She had been mistaken for the voice of their temple female. Oblivious to the multivision, Helva stared at the cylindrical top of the temple and recognized what she had not consciously identified before. The cylinder was a ship on its long axis, nose and fins buried in the lava of the old eruption. The temple entrance was nothing more than an airlock, and by the entrance Helva could trace the faintly visible designation of a Central Worlds brain ship. As clear as the day she had heard it, the day Jenin had died, Helva recalled what Sylvia had told her about another grief-stricken ship. This had to be 732. And what better place to mourn than a red, dark, violent world, so conducive to the immolation of grief? Or had the 732 aimed at the fiery maw of the erupting volcano and somehow been deflected from the seething cone at the last moment, lodged immovably in the lava flow at its base? Had the 732 turned her torturous mind on the grim world and urged thousands to die in expiation for the death of her beloved? The requirements of duty were suddenly lucid to Helva, and the plans to discharge it sprang to her mind. With the genius of sheer desperation, Helva began to sing, her voice a deep, caressing baritone, coloring her resonances with minor-keyed longing, suspending reason for the dictates of sheer instinct. Death is mine forever, she intoned, repeating the phrase a third above the responses Eliathites chanted, the first phrase in obedient mimicry. It was like having an incredibly well-rehearsed world chorus at your disposal. Helva exploited the phenomenon ruthlessly. Sleep I cannot, rest eludes me, and down a fifth, dreams to plague me, tortured I. Up to an augmented seventh as the chorus chimed in on a dissonance, calculated to raise inner hackles and pierce the gut with longing. Let me sleep, let me rest, let me die. Helva sang, her voice sliding into the edged timbre of a harsh, yearning tenor. Down again to the original musical phrase, but this time the baritone quality was tinged with scorn. Death is mine forever. Let me sleep, let me rest, let me die. The last word became a vibrant crescendo of derision, diminishing to a mocking whisper long after the supporting chorus had completed its cry on the augmented seventh. CENTCOM, calling Kilo Hotel 834, will you acknowledge? Acknowledge! The hard official voice of Regulus Bass, CENTCOM, broke through Helva's fantastic musical improvisation. Mayday, mayday, Helva replied, in a jolting soprano on both tight beam and the Aliathite contact band. The chorus obediently shrilled out the resounding emergency challenge. Helva caught her breath as she saw Kira stagger in instinctive reaction to the cry. Mayday? Mayday? CENTCOM demanded. You bet, with a cratty fool Dylanizing on Aliath? With a shock, Helva realized that was exactly what she was doing. Dylanizing. Her appeal to Kira, though couched musically, The one medium with which she could hope to reach the entranced scout had crystallized further into the subliminal form of a Dylan-esque protest. Exultant, she knew how to manipulate this to her own ends. With a barely perceptible increase in tempo, she repeated her first phrase, no longer a longing legato, but a mocking staccato. As the chorus responded idiotically true to its model, she hurriedly reported to CENTCOM. Alioth's religious head is the rogue ship 732. The religious motivation is death. The brawn, where is your brawn? CENTCOM crackled. What is the release word for 732? Helva hissed, then chanted the second phrase of her Dylan, again picking up the tempo so that the beat as well as the sound had urgency to it. Report, CENTCOM demanded. I don't have time to report, you nardy fool. For the release word, Helva snapped. She jumped her voice an octave and a half, switching the registers to Helden tenor, her phrase ringing through the plaza in an arrow of sheer emotion-packed sound to pierce the trance of her scout. Kira's guards were lurching now, half dazed by the treacherous fumes that filled the plaza. They had Kira by the arms, and Helva, trapped in the background of the mighty chorus, couldn't tell whether they were restraining Kira or hanging onto her for support. The girl alone was unaffected by the hallucinogen. Let me sleep, let me rest, let me die. Helva's tenor rang scornfully, lashing viciously at Kira's death wish. You fool, CENTCOM said. She wants to die. Give me the release word, Helva cried at the tight beam in a strident soprano, then projected her voice, bitterly powerful, angrily, compelling, thundering protest. Let me sleep, let me rest, let me die. The phrase echoed tauntingly through the plaza. The chorus, unable to imitate the incredible pitch of Helva's voice, dropped to the lower octave. The challenge rocked back across the plaza, punctuated by the massive thunder of erupting volcanoes. With a sudden, soundless, soul-shattering wrench, the massed glimpses of chaos dissolved, and Helva was suddenly of single sight. Kira, in a darkly curtained chamber, unevenly lit by red braziers, increasing her dark vision, Helva penetrated the gloom. Her attention focused on the hideous object that dominated the room. On a raised black basaltic slab lay the decomposing remains of what had once been a man. The teeth were bared whitely through the decayed flesh in a travesty of a smile. The tendons of the neck were stark ridges and cartilage of his esophagus ended in the indestructible fabric of a scout coverall. His hands, crossed on the chest cavity, crumpled by the massive fatal blow, were linked by the intertwined overgrowth of fingernail. The 732's dead brawn lay in state, and Helva was seeing him through Kira's contact button at last. A wailing chant filled the chamber, a meaningless, mournful dribble of sound emanating from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The mad brain, encased in an indestructible titanium shell, had all circuits open, keening, oblivious to everything. In as soundless a whisper as she could broadcast, Helva muttered swiftly to Kira, "It's the rogue 732. It's gone mad. It's got to be destroyed." It was easier somehow for Helva, knowing what she must do, to think of the 732 as an impersonal it, rather than the female brain that it had once been. Kira swayed, making no reply. For one paralyzing demisecond, Helva wondered if the girl had inadvertently opened the contact, if Kira were still in the thrall of the powerful death wish. Had Helva's Dylan protest pierced Kira's self-destructive trance with his mockery? Had Helva succeeded in jolting her brawn to sanity? The release word would be no mortal use if she did not have her mobile brawn's cooperation to immobilize the rogue. With slow steps, Kira approached the bier and its ghastly occupant. The keening grew louder, the mumbling became articulated. "He has been taken. He who orders has been taken," chanted the 732. The crowd echoed the chant as readily as they had Helva's. "He's gone. Saber is gone." "Not helpless again," Helva cried, silently, her mind overwhelmed by hopelessness. Eerily, another sound was superimposed over the 732 wail. "Now that dwarf presents a definite problem, Leah." The wowing, muffled words could barely be distinguished. "I wouldn't be surprised." It was a man's voice, Helva realized, playing back at a lagging speed which distorted the words into a yawing parody. The ship had broadcast this tape so many times that the sound of Seber's taped voice was as decayed as his corpse on the bier. Kira continued to sway in her graceful circumnavigation. Speak, O Seber, in singing tones that thy servant Kira may hear the music of thy beloved voice, Kira crooned, making an obeisance to the column behind which lay the shell of the mad 732. Helva barely managed to suppress her cry of intolerable relief at the cues Kira was feeding her. "Sencom, the release word!" Helva pleaded to the tight beam, just as the 732's crooning broke off abruptly. Helva could almost feel the ship's held breath. Delay, where was Sencom? Leah, the interference on my contact is incredible. Can't you clear up the relays? That dwarf is... Leah, the interference on my contact is incredible. Can't you clear up the relays? That dwarf is wreaking havoc. Even Kira jumped involuntarily as Helva, deepening her voice to a baritone approximation of Seber's, ad-libbed frantically. Can't seem to read you clearly. Leah, you got wires crossed. Seber! Shrieked the rogue ship, her voice wild with incredulous hope. I'm trapped! I was thrown off course when the edge of the volcano blew. I tried to die too. Kira was fumbling with the draperies at the bulkhead. Her escort, roused from their euphoria as they sensed sacrilege, dove towards Kira. Her swift hand caught one in the voice box with a deadly chop. She ducked under the other man, using her body to throw him against the bier so squarely that his head cracked ominously against the stone, and he slumped down. Kilo Hotel. The release is Na Thom Te A Ro. Watch the pitch. And Helva. Yeah, choose your Chubon. Okay. And Helva, knowing she was in effect executing one of her own kind, broadcasts the release word to 732. As the syllables with their pitched nuances activated the release of the access panel, Kira caught the plate, reached in, and deftly threw the valve that would flood the inside of the shell with anesthesia. I can't see you, Seber. Where are... And 732's despairing wail was stilled in longed-for oblivion. Kira whirled the panel clinking behind the concealed draperies as cowled figures lurched into the main cabin from the quarters behind. Hold! Helva commanded in Leah's voice. He who orders has decided. Take the barefaced woman back to the ship. Such blasphemous seed is not for the chosen of Alioth. Kira, again trance-like, followed the dazed hoods back down the steps. Helva, what in the fartles is happening here? Helva, what in the fartles is happening there? Sencom demanded within the 834. He has decided, the fanatical mob in the plaza groaned and swayed in the thrall of hallucinogenic fumes. Helva! Snapped Sencom. Oh, shut up, all of you, said Helva, near a breaking point. He has ordered, that is the eternal truth. She watched just long enough to be sure that the reeling, freak-drunk Aliothites would not interfere with Kira's return. How they could, Helva couldn't imagine, for they were dropping by the hundreds, exhausted by fumes and frenzy. You'd better have a damn good explanation for deliberately abrogating specific restrictions in your journey tape regarding Dylanistic... I'll Dylanize you, you fatuous oaf! Helva cut in angrily. The end justifies the means, and might I remind you that for some stupid reason, unknown forever to God and man, your list of restricted planets did not include Alioth, as by the fingernails of that god they should have. Sencom sputtered indignantly. Control yourself, Helva suggested acidly. I found your long-lost rogue, and I have killed her. And I did some rough but effective therapy on your precious Kira of Canopus. What more do you want of one brain shell? Huh? Sencom maintained silence for 60 stunned seconds. Where is Kira? And Helva could swear Sencom sounded contrite. She's all right. Put her on. She's all right. Helva repeated with weary emphasis. She's on her way back from the temple. The spaceport rocked under multiple eruptions just as the vehicle bearing Kira screeched to a halt at the lift. Helva unlocked the mechanism, and Kira leapt on before the guards came to their senses. The ground danced under the ship's stabilizers, and, as Kira dove from airlock to pilot's couch, Helva slammed the lock shut and precipitously lifted from grim Alioth.
You can wait a minute. It's okay. I'll give you some more water.
Or are you thirsty right now?
You can wait a minute. I gave you a full bowl of water before I started. I still have you, though. Well, I'll pet you if you move to the other side.
In the tail scanners, they saw the guards retreating to safety as the gantry tumbled leisurely down. Bright jewels dotted the receding planet as it gave them a volcanic send-off. Scout Kira of the Kilo Hotel 834 reporting, the slender girl said crisply to CENTCOM, shedding her cloak. Helva half expected a shower of hairpins to follow, but Kira remained tautly erect before the tight beam. She gave a terse report, demanding to know why traders had not reported the presence of service-type contact buttons plainly visible on every Aliothite, and why, a far more criminal admission, the hallucinogenic gas eruptions had not been reported. Hallucinogenic gas? CENTCOM echoed weakly. Such instances were the nightmare of colonization. Entire populations could be subjected to illegal domination by such emissions as had indeed happened on Alioth. I recommend strongly that all traders dealing with Alioth in the last 50 years be questioned as to their motives in suppressing such information from Central Worlds, and discover who was the semi-intelligent CW representative who cleared this freak-off planet for colonization. CENTCOM was reduced to incoherent sputters. Reduced. Honk! Stop gargling, Kira suggested sweetly, and order an all-haste planet therapy team here. You've got an entire society to reorient to the business of living. We'll file a comprehensive report from Nakar, but now I've got to go inspect our children. That was a rough takeoff. Over and out. And Kira closed the tight beam down. With a fluid motion, she propelled herself off to the kitchen, shaking her braids free and massaging her scalp with her rough fingers. "Ugh, my head is pounding," she exclaimed, reaching for coffee. That gas was unbelievably malodorous. She leaned wearily against the counter, her shoulders sagging in fatigue. Helva waited, knowing Kira was sorting her thoughts. The closer I got to that temple, the deeper the terrible miasma of grief. It was almost visible, Helva, she said, and then added scathingly, and I wallowed in it until that Dylan of yours reached me. Her eyes widened respectfully. The hair on the back of my neck stood up straight. That final chord got me right here, she groaned, jabbing at her abdomen with a graphic fist. Thorn would have given his guts to compose such a powerful Dylan. Her shoulders jerked spasmodically in a violent muscle spasm. Oh, that awful corpse! She closed her eyes and shuddered, shaking her head to rid herself of the effect. I think, she murmured, her eyes narrowing with self-appraisal, I've been thinking I had done the same thing to Thorn. I think perhaps you had, Helva agreed softly. Kira sipped at her coffee, her face tired but alive. The mask of vivacity had replaced by an inner calm. I've been so stupid, she said, with a trenchant self-contempt. Not even CENTCOM is infallible, Helva drawled. Kira threw back her head in a whoop of laughter. That's the eternal truth, she crowed, dancing back into the main cabin. Helva watched the victory dance, immeasurably pleased with the outcome of the affair, as far as Kira was concerned. She could not regret that she had had to kill one of her own peers. Leah had really died years before with her scout. That tortured remnant had peace at last. And so had Kira. She and Helva would continue on their stork run, picking up the seeds from... Helva yet let out a yip of exultation. Kira stared at her startled. What hit you? It's so ridiculously simple. I can't believe someone never suggested it to you. Or maybe they did and you rejected it. Well, I'll never know unless you tell me what it is. Kira, there. Kira replied caustically. One of the facets of your grief psychosis. I'm over it now, Kira interrupted Helva, her eyes flashing angrily. Ha! One of the facets has been the lack of progeny from your seed and thorns, right? The scout's face turned starkly white, but Helva plunged on. Neither sets of your parents were stupid enough to have ignored the RCA duty, right? So their seed is on file. Take some of your mother's and his father's, and... Kira's eyes widened and her jaw dropped, her face lighting with incredulous radiance. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Delicately, she stretched out her hand, touching the access panel softly. Helva was ridiculously, embarrassingly delighted at the acceptance of the idea. Then Kira drew her breath in sharply, her face concerned. But for you, wouldn't you take your mother's and... No, Helva said sharply, then added more gently. That won't be necessary. She knew in mind and heart now that the resolution of grief is highly individual, now that both she and Kira had reached it by different means, just as Theoda had. Kira looked unaccountably stricken, as if she had no right to take the solution Helva offered if Helva did not too. After all, the ship chuckled, there aren't many women, and Helva used the word proudly, knowing that she had passed as surely from girlhood to woman's estate as any of her mobile sisters, who give birth to 110,000 babies at one time. Kira dissolved into laughter, crowing with delight over Helva's analogy. She snapped up her guitar, strumming a loud introductory arpeggio. Then the two, ship and scout, surprised the stars with a swinging Schubert serenade as they sped toward Nakar and deliverance. So, the next chapter is Dramatic Mission. And it's honestly, I think, one of the most interesting ones. So overall, in this book, there are 6 chapters. And really the only one that I remember freaking me out the first time was chapter 5. So we'll see how that goes now that I am older and allegedly wiser. But anyway, it is getting late and you need your rest. So just remember, if somebody can hate for no reason at all, I can love you for exactly the same reason. So, go out and do your best, and be somebody that you can be proud of. Good night.